March 1945, the Rhineland. A German Oberst stands behind a shattered farmhouse wall, binoculars pressed against his weathered face. He watches something impossible. Across the cratered highway, American engineers swarm like ants over what was, just 6 hours ago, a smoking ruin of asphalt and steel. His own sappers had destroyed that road 3 days prior, confident it would take weeks to rebuild. They had done the math. They had followed doctrine. Destroy the infrastructure, slow the advance, buy time for retreat and regrouping. But the Americans are not rebuilding. They are conjuring. Massive steel mats roll out across the torn earth like industrial carpets. Strange machines pump rivers of black material that hardens as it flows. Men work with mechanical precision, no wasted motion, no hesitation. The Oberst lowers his binoculars, his hands tremble slightly. Not from fear of battle, he has seen battle. This is something else. This is the moment when a soldier realizes he is not fighting an army. He is fighting a factory, a nation that can erase destruction faster than he can create it. He turns to his adjutant and speaks words that will echo through interrogation rooms in the coming weeks. The war, he knows, is already over. The problem began on the beaches of Normandy, though no one fully understood it yet. June 6, 1944, Allied forces storm ashore, break through Atlantic wall defenses, and begin the liberation of Western Europe. The landing succeeds beyond Churchill's nightmares and Eisenhower's cautious optimism. Within weeks, the Bocage country gives way. Patton's Third Army explodes across France like a steel fist through paper. Towns fall, Germans retreat, flags change. Victory smells close, tastes like summer dust and burnt cordite. But behind the tanks, behind the infantry divisions racing east, a silent crisis grows. Logistics, the unglamorous mathematics. Ticks of war. Every tank needs fuel, every rifle needs bullets, every soldier needs food, water, medical supplies. The Allied advance moves so fast that supply lines stretch thin, then thinner, then snap entirely. Trucks race back to Normandy beaches, load up, race forward again. The Red Ball Express, they call it. A one-way highway reserved exclusively for supply trucks. Drivers work 20-hour shifts. Vehicles break down, tires shred on bad roads, fuel runs low. By September 1944, Patton's tanks sit idle in Lorraine, empty of gasoline. Montgomery's forces in Belgium slow to a crawl. The great pursuit stutters and stops, not because of German resistance, though that stiffens as defenders fall back toward their homeland. The advance stops because you cannot fight without bullets, cannot move without fuel, cannot sustain an army on enthusiasm alone. Napoleon learned this in Russia, Lee learned this in Pennsylvania. Now Eisenhower confronts the same ancient equation in the mud of France. The roads are the problem. Europe's infrastructure, built over centuries for civilian traffic, crumbles under military weight. Sherman tanks weigh 30 tons. Supply trucks loaded weigh 5. Multiply that by thousands, running day and night, and even modern highways disintegrate. Add German demolitions. Every retreating Wehrmacht unit follows scorched earth protocol. Blow the bridges, crater the highways, mine the detours. Leave nothing useful for the enemy. It works. Allied engineers repair one bridge and another falls. They patch one road segment and another collapses. Traditional construction methods require time, materials, skilled labor. The front moves faster than repairs can follow. German planners understand this perfectly. Their defensive strategy for late 1944 relies not on winning battles but on buying time. Slow the Allies down, let winter come, let supply problems compound, force them to pause, regroup, wait for spring. Meanwhile, new weapons reach production. V-2 rockets rain on London. Jet fighters enter service. Perhaps, just perhaps, if they can hold long enough, negotiate a separate peace with the Western Allies against the Soviets. It is a desperate plan, but desperation has become familiar. The strategy has historical precedent. In World War I, both sides learned that attacking is harder than defending, that logistics defeat armies as surely as bullets, that infrastructure matters more than heroism. German staff officers study those lessons. They know the Allied advance must culminate, must reach a point where supplies cannot follow, where momentum dies. They just need to accelerate that culmination, make every mile cost more, make every bridge a week-long project, make every road an engineering nightmare. For a brief moment in autumn 1944, it seems to work. The Allies pause. Market Garden fails at Arnhem. The front stabilizes. German forces, bloodied but intact, dig in along their western border. They have traded space for time, cities for preparation. Now they wait for winter, for Allied exhaustion, for the logistical collapse they believe is inevitable. They have seen this pattern before in Russia, in North Africa, everywhere armies outrun their supply lines. It is as predictable as sunrise. What they do not see, cannot see, is what is happening behind Allied lines, in depots across France, in engineer battalions attached to every corps. In the planning rooms at SHAEF headquarters, a revolution is taking shape, not a revolution in tactics or firepower, but in something more fundamental, a revolution in the speed of constructa on itself. American engineers, drawing on industrial techniques and pre-war innovations, are preparing to break every rule of military logistics. They are about to make the impossible routine. The United States Army Corps of Engineers did not invent speed construction in 1944. They perfected it. The roots stretch back decades to Depression-era public works projects where efficiency meant the difference between employment and starvation. The Hoover Dam, the Tennessee Valley Authority. Projects that demanded new methods, faster techniques, industrial-scale thinking applied to dirt and concrete. American engineers learned to think big, work fast, and improvise solutions that European traditionalists considered reckless. When war came, those civilian engineers became military officers. They brought their methods with them. In North Africa, engineer battalions repaired Axis airfields in days instead of weeks. They learned to work under fire, to prioritize function over perfection, to accept that good enough today beats perfect tomorrow. In Sicily and Italy, they built roads up mountains, bridges across gorges, supply routes through terrain that German planners assumed was impassable. Each campaign taught new lessons. Each bottleneck demanded new solutions. The real breakthrough came from thinking differently about what a road actually is. Traditional engineering treats roads as permanent structures. You excavate properly, compact the soil, lay foundation layers, pour asphalt or concrete to exact specifications, let it cure, inspect everything. The result lasts decades, but construction takes months. Military needs inverted that equation. A road that lasts 3 months but takes 3 days is infinitely more valuable than a road that lasts 30 years but takes 3 months to build. Speed became the primary metric. Durability became negotiable. Enter the Marston mat, officially called pierced steel planking. Developed in 1940 by Carnegie Steel for temporary airfield construction, PSP was elegantly simple. Steel plates 10 feet long and 15 inches wide, punched with holes to reduce weight and improve traction. Each plate had hooks on the edges that locked into neighboring plates. Lay them out in a grid pattern and you had an instant roadway or runway, strong enough to support bombers, fast enough to deploy in hours, portable enough to roll up and reuse elsewhere. The Army Corps of Engineers saw potential beyond airfields. They began adapting PSP for road construction. A bombed-out highway, roll steel matting over the crater, a muddy detour, lay down matting and vehicles roll head over. The system was not perfect. Matting was noisy, uncomfortable to drive on, and wore out eventually, but it worked immediately, and immediate was what mattered. Engineer battalions trained extensively on PSP deployment. They timed themselves, competed for speed records, turned installation into choreographed performance. Parallel innovations emerged in rapid concrete and asphalt repair. American chemical companies developed quick-setting concrete that reached usable strength in hours instead of days. Asphalt could be heated, transported in specialized trucks, and poured into shell craters while still molten. New techniques for soil stabilization allowed roads to be built on questionable ground. Portable Bailey bridges, prefabricated in sections, replaced demolished spans in a fraction of traditional construction time. Everything was designed for speed, modularity, and simplicity. Behind these technologies stood American industrial capacity. The factories that built cars before Pearl Harbor now built engineer equipment. Steel mills ran at maximum output. Concrete plants operated around the clock. Every engineer battalion received standardized equipment sets. Bulldozers, graders, rollers, asphalt heaters, portable generators, welding equipment, everything needed to build infrastructure anywhere, anytime. The equipment came with detailed manuals, training programs, spare parts supply chains. Nothing was left to chance or improvisation. The personnel mattered as much as the equipment. Engineer battalions recruited from construction trades, carpenters, electricians, heavy equipment operators, men who built things for a living before the war. They understood materials, tolerances, structural principles. They could look at a destroyed bridge and visualize solutions. They worked with confidence born of experience, not just training. Officers came from engineering schools, from civilian firms, from highway departments. They spoke the language of construction but thought in military terms. By late 1944, everything was ready. The engineer battalions had their equipment, their training, their doctrine. They had learned hard lessons in Italy and perfected their methods. They had supply chains stretching back to American factories operating at wartime capacity. They had institutional support from commanders who understood that logistics win wars. What they needed now was opportunity, a chance to show what industrial-age engineering could accomplish when given full resources and clear objectives. That opportunity was coming. The final push into Germany would demand every innovation, every technique, every ounce of capability these engineers had developed. The roads they were about to build would not just support and advance, they would break an enemy's will to resist. The engineering innovation itself deserves examination first. Stripped of romance and viewed as pure technical achievement, pierced steel planking represented a philosophical shift in construction thinking. Traditional roads are built from the ground up, each layer dependent on the one below. PSP ignored that hierarchy entirely. It created a floating surface, a steel skin that distributed weight across whatever lay beneath. Engineers could roll matting across mud, rubble, even shallow water. The perforations served dual purposes. They reduced weight by 30%, making transport feasible. They also allowed drainage, preventing water from pooling and destabilizing the surface. Each mat weighed only 66 pounds, light enough for 2 men to carry yet strong enough to support a Sherman tank when interlocked with its neighbors. But PSP was just the visible component. Beneath it, American engineers deployed soil stabilization techniques borrowed from civilian highway projects. Chemical compounds mixed with local soil created semi-permanent base layers in hours. Calcium chloride, Portland cement, even crude oil could transform loose dirt into load-bearing foundation. The engineers tested local materials constantly, adapted their mixtures to available resources, refused to be limited by textbook solutions. When PSP was unavailable, they improvised with log corduroy roads, with gravel from demolished buildings, with crushed brick and stone. The doctrine was clear: keep vehicles moving at any cost. Asphalt technology underwent equally dramatic evolution. Pre-war road construction required asphalt to cool and cure for days before accepting traffic. Chemical additives changed that calculus. Quick-cure asphalts reached 70% strength within hours. Portable heating units kept material workable during transport and application. Engineer battalions could literally pour asphalt into a crater at dawn and route tanks across it by dusk. The surface might not last years, but it lasted long enough. Repair crews followed behind advancing units, constantly upgrading and maintaining the temporary fixes. Roads evolved in stages, from emergency patch to semi-permanent surface to full reconstruction, all while traffic continued flowing. The industrial advantage cannot be overstated. By 1944, American factories produced more steel than Germany, Britain, and the Soviet Union combined. That abundance translated into engineering capability. German engineers hoarded materials, calculated carefully, made do with scarcity. American engineers used steel lavishly because they could. Need to reinforce a bridge? Add more steel. Road sinking into mud? Lay down more matting. The psychological impact of abundance shaped doctrine. American solutions favored overwhelming a problem with resources rather than elegant efficiency. It was engineering by brute force, but force was precisely what America possessed in surplus. The tactical implications revolutionized mobile warfare. Patton understood immediately. His Third Army advanced faster than any force in military history precisely because his engineers kept pace with his tanks. When German demolitions destroyed bridges, engineers built bypasses within hours. When supply trucks bogged down in mud, matting roads appeared overnight. Patton's famous quote captures the symbiosis perfectly. "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks gotta have gas." His engineers ensured the gas arrived. They built what he called the Red Ball Route, a network of dedicated supply highways that functioned like circulatory systems feeding the advance. The numbers tell the story more clearly than words. In the month following the Rhine crossings, American engineers constructed or repaired over 2,000 miles of road. They built or restored 300 bridges. They cleared 17,000 miles from roadways. They worked under artillery fire, under air attack, through rain and snow and exhaustion. Some units operated continuously for 72 hours, rotating personnel through shifts but never stopping work. Sleep became a luxury. Meals were eaten standing up, tools still in hand. The pace was inhuman, sustained only by adrenaline and the knowledge that every hour of delay cost lives at the front. Contrast this with German capabilities. Wehrmacht engineers were technically skilled, often more educated than their American counterparts. They understood classical engineering principles, could calculate load stresses and material strengths with precision, but they worked within a collapsing industrial base. Steel was rationed. Concrete was scarce. Equipment broke down and could not be replaced. German engineer units spent more time destroying their own infrastructure than building new. It was a losing game, trading present capability for future delay. Every bridge they demolished was one less bridge available for their own retreat. Every road they cratered became an obstacle when they needed to move reinforcements. The psychological dimension operated on multiple levels. For American troops, the sight of engineers working was reassuring. It meant supplies would arrive, reinforcements would come, wounded would be evacuated. The roads were physical proof that the military machine functioned, that someone was thinking ahead, planning, building the infrastructure of victory. Morale remained high partly because soldiers never felt abandoned or cut off. The engineers were always there, always working, always connecting the front to the rear. For German defenders, the psychological impact was opposite and devastating. They would destroy a bridge at midnight and see American vehicles crossing a new span by dawn. They would crater a highway and watch trucks rolling across steel matting before the dust settled. It broke something fundamental in military psychology. Defensive doctrine assumes that obstacles delay attackers, that destruction buys time. When destruction no longer delays, when obstacles appear and disappear like magic tricks, the defender loses faith in his own actions. German after-action reports from early 1945 repeatedly mention the impossibility of slowing American logistics. The word impossible appears with increasing frequency. Not impossible to fight American soldiers, but impossible to stop American engineers. Intelligence officers on both sides recognized the disparity. German reconnaissance focused increasingly on identifying engineer units, tracking their movements, reporting their capabilities. Captured documents reveal fascination mixed with despair. One report from January 1945 describes American road building as industrial warfare on a scale beyond our capacity to counter. Another from March simply states that destroying infrastructure no longer serves defensive purposes because repairs happen faster than damage. The conclusions were clear even if unspoken. Germany was not losing to better tactics or braver soldiers. Germany was losing to a nation that could build faster than Germany could destroy. The human element behind the machinery deserves closer examination. Engineer battalions were not composed of engineers in the civilian sense. Most were working-class men drafted from construction sites, farms, and factories. They learned their trade in training camps across the American South and Midwest, where instructors drilled them on equipment operation and basic construction principles. Many had never operated a bulldozer before the Army put them behind the controls. They learned by doing, made mistakes on practice ranges, and gradually developed competence that became confidence. By the time they reached Europe, these men could build a bridge in their sleep, lay matting by feel in darkness, estimate material needs at a glance. The work was brutal in ways that combat infantry never experienced. Engineers worked when everyone else rested. While assault units secured an area and dug in for the night, engineer companies moved forward to begin construction. They worked through darkness because daylight brought enemy observation and artillery. They worked through rain because the schedule never stopped. Frostbite was common in winter, heat exhaustion in summer, equipment malfunctions were constant. A bulldozer throwing a track at midnight meant hours of repairs by flashlight, tools freezing to bare hands, exhaustion so deep that men fell asleep standing up. Yet morale in engineer units remained remarkably high. Part of this came from visible results. An infantryman fires his rifle and rarely sees the effect. An engineer builds a bridge and watches an entire division cross it. The work produced tangible outcomes, immediate proof of contribution. Engineers saw their bridges carrying ambulances to field hospitals, their roads bringing up ammunition for the next attack, their labor directly enabling the advance. This sense of purpose sustained them through conditions that would have broken purely combat units. They were building victory, literally constructing the path to Berlin. The racial dynamics within engineer units tell a complicated American story. Many engineer battalions were segregated, composed entirely of black soldiers led by white officers. The famous Red Ball Express was operated primarily by African-American truck drivers and support personnel. These units faced discrimination even while performing essential work. They were given older equipment, worse quarters, less recognition. Yet they performed at the same high standard as white units, often exceeding expectations precisely to counter prejudiced assumptions. The contribution of black engineers to Allied victory was immense and systematically under-recognized until decades after the war. They built the same roads, laid the same matting, worked the same inhuman hours. Their capability proved what should never have required proving. German responses to American engineering evolved through several stages. Initially, Wehrmacht forces treated Allied engineers as secondary targets, less threatening than infantry or armor. This was standard doctrine. Destroy the combat units first, worry about logistics later. By late 1944, that calculus shifted. German artillery began prioritizing engineer concentrations. Luftwaffe aircraft, increasingly rare, sometimes targeted bridge construction sites rather than tank columns. The Germans recognized too late that killing engineers was more valuable than killing riflemen. A dead engineer represented lost capability. A destroyed bulldozer could not be replaced. But by the time they adjusted their targeting, Allied air superiority made precision strikes nearly impossible. Some German units attempted to counter American construction speed with accelerated demolition. Special engineer detachments would booby-trap destroyed bridges with delayed charges, hoping to kill Allied repair crews or destroy new construction. They mined approach roads, hoping to damage engineer equipment. They positioned snipers to target officers coordinating construction efforts. These tactics achieved occasional success but never approached strategic significance. For every American engineer killed, 10 more arrived. For every bulldozer destroyed, 3 more came forward. The industrial disparity was simply too vast to overcome with tactical cleverness. Captured German officers provided the most revealing testimony. Post-war interrogations, conducted before Cold War tensions made cooperation politically complicated, yielded hours of recorded interviews. A Wehrmacht colonel captured in April 1945 described watching American engineers bridge the Rhine. His account is clinical, almost detached, the tone of a professional assessing superior technique. He notes the speed, the coordination, the apparent endless supply of materials. Then his voice changes. He describes the moment he understood Germany had lost. Not lost the battle for the Rhine, but lost the war entire. When he saw American trucks rolling across bridges that should not exist yet, carrying supplies that should not be available, supporting an advance that should have culminated weeks ago. That was the moment. That was when military mathematics became inescapable. Another interrogation, this one of a Luftwaffe intelligence officer, reveals different insights. He had spent months analyzing Allied logistics, plotting supply routes, identifying bottlenecks. His reports to high command repeatedly warned that American engineering capability was being underestimated. His warnings were ignored or dismissed as defeatist. The German military leadership, so obsessed with tank specifications and infantry tactics, never grasped that wars in the industrial age are won by engineers and factories. They kept fighting World War I while the Americans fought something entirely new, the intelligence beta. Gents officer's frustration is palpable in the transcripts. He knew. He warned. No one listened. The moral angle presents uncomfortable questions. Engineering is theoretically neutral, neither good nor evil, but engineering in service of war is never neutral. American engineers built roads that carried troops to liberate concentration camps. They also built infrastructure that enabled area bombing campaigns, that supported advances which killed civilians alongside soldiers. The engineers themselves rarely grappled with these questions during the war. They had a job, they did it well, moral philosophy was for chaplains and philosophers. Yet the capability they demonstrated had implications beyond 1945. The same techniques that built temporary roads in France would later build highways in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq. The doctrine of rapid construction became permanent military practice. Engineering as a weapon, infrastructure as strategy. This was the legacy, whether the men pouring asphalt in the Rhine Valley understood it or not. March 7, 1945. Remagen, a small German town on the west bank of the Rhine, notable for nothing except a railroad bridge called Ludendorff. The bridge should not exist anymore. German demolition teams have orders to destroy every Rhine crossing, deny the Americans any easy route into the German heartland. But something goes wrong. Charges detonate prematurely or fail entirely, or perhaps a German engineer loses his nerve at the last second. The reasons remain debated. What matters is the result. When lead elements of the American 9th Armored Division approach Remagen that afternoon, the Ludendorff Bridge still stands. Lieutenant Karl Timmermann leads his company across at a run. German machine guns fire from the far bank. Bullets snap through the air. Men fall. Others keep running. The bridge towers loom overhead, steel girders twisted by partial demolitions but still holding. Timmerman reaches the east bank. More Americans follow. Within hours, an entire division is pouring across. By midnight, engineers arrive and the real work begins. The bridge is damaged, unstable, could collapse at any moment under the weight of military traffic. It needs reinforcement, repair, and it needs these things immediately while combat units establish a bridgehead and German counterattacks begin. The engineer response to Remagen reveals the full capacity of American military construction doctrine in crisis conditions. Within 12 hours, 6 engineer battalions converge on the site. They work under direct artillery fire. German guns across the river have the bridge ranged perfectly. Shells land constantly. Men die while welding support beams, while pouring concrete, while driving pilings into the riverbed. The work does not stop, cannot stop. Every hour the bridge stands is another hour for reinforcements to cross, another division added to the bridgehead, another increment of pressure on German defenses. But the engineers do not rely solely on repairing the Ludendorff. They begin building additional crossings immediately. Pontoon bridges, treadway bridges, every type of tactical bridging in the Army inventory gets deployed at Remagen. Steel cables stretch across the Rhine. Floating platforms lock together into roadways that bob and sway with current but hold firm under tank traffic. By March 10th, 3 days after the initial crossing, 5 separate bridges span the river at Remagen. Even if the Ludendorff collapses, which it does on March 17th, killing 28 engineers working on it, the Rhine is no longer an obstacle. It has become an inconvenience. The speed stuns German commanders. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, commanding German forces in the west, receives reports of the Remagen crossing with disbelief that hardens into despair. His defensive plan assumed the Rhine would delay Americans for weeks while he consolidated forces, established new defensive lines, perhaps negotiated some kind of armistice. The river was supposed to be Germany's moat, final barrier before the heartland. American engineers void that assumption in 72 hours. Kesselring orders counterattacks. He commits his last reserve units to destroying the bridgehead. Luftwaffe jets, precious and few, dive bomb the bridges. Nothing works. American engineers repair damage as fast as Germans inflict it. The psychological impact ripples through Wehrmacht ranks faster than radio messages. Soldiers who retreated across the Rhine, believing themselves safe, suddenly face American tanks appearing on their side of the river. The defensive line they were promised does not exist. The natural barrier that was supposed to stop the advance is already behind them. Desertion rates spike. Entire units surrender without fighting, not because they are cowards, but because the military logic of resistance has evaporated. You fight to hold a position that matters. Once that position is bypassed or overrun, fighting becomes pointless death rather than military duty. German officer corps fractures along predictable lines. Younger officers, those who rose through ranks during the war itself, tend toward pragmatism. They see the situation clearly. Germany cannot win. Further resistance only increases the casualty count and destruction. Some actively seek opportunities to surrender to American forces before the Soviets arrive from the east. Older officers, those whose careers span back to World War I, often cannot accept reality. They issue impossible orders. A man counterattacks with divisions that no longer exist, threaten courts-martial for defeatist talk. The gap between fantasy and reality becomes a chasm. One particularly telling incident occurs in late March near the city of Hanau. An American engineer company working on highway repairs encounters a German major approaching under white flag. The major speaks English, requests to speak with the senior American officer present. He is brought to the engineer battalion commander, a captain from Michigan. The German major is older, career military, aristocratic bearing despite soiled uniform. He carries a leather briefcase containing maps, unit dispositions, defensive plans. He offers this intelligence freely, asks only that his surrender be recorded formally so his family will not face reprisal accusations of cowardice. The American captain accepts the briefcase, assigns men to escort the major to the rear for processing. Before leaving, the German major asks a question. How did you build roads so fast? The American tries to explain PSP, quick-setting asphalt, industrial capacity. The major shakes his head. He understands the technical answer. His question is deeper, almost philosophical. How did you build roads faster than we could destroy them? The American has no answer. The major nods, as if his silence confirms something, and walks away into captivity. That question, echoing through interrogation centers and POW camps, captures the moment of German psychological defeat. The war continues for another 6 weeks, but the will to fight is already broken. The Ruhr pocket forms through a combination of American speed and German paralysis. By early April, Patton's Third Army drives deep into central Germany from the south, while the First and Ninth Armies sweep in from the north. The two forces meet at Lippstadt on April 1st, encircling Army Group B, over 300,000 German troops trapped in the industrial Ruhr region. Field Marshal Walter Model commands the pocket. He is a capable officer, one of Hitler's favorites, a man who has performed miracles of defense on the Eastern Front. But the Ruhr is different. Model has no room to maneuver, no depth to trade for time. He is surrounded and the noose tightens daily. What makes the encirclement decisive is not the initial encirclement itself, but what happens next. American engineers immediately begin building road networks around the pocket's perimeter. Supply routes that allow rapid repositioning of forces, that enable artillery to shift positions overnight, that ensure every attacking unit has ammunition and fuel. The roads transform the pocket from a static siege into a dynamic strangulation. German units attempting breakouts hit American defenses that seem to appear from nowhere, supported by logistics that never falter. Units trying to retreat inward find roads cratered behind them by American air power, then watch those same roads repaired within hours when Americans need them. Inside the pocket, German morale collapses at varying speeds. Combat units, those that have been fighting continuously since Normandy or the Eastern Front, tend to hold together longer. They have unit cohesion, experienced leadership, the habits of discipline. Rear echelon units, supply troops, administrative personnel, these disintegrate faster. They were never trained for frontline combat, never expected to fight surrounded and hopeless. Food supplies dwindle. Ammunition reserves deplete. Medical supplies run out and wounded men die of treatable injuries. The spring weather turns rainy and cold. Soldiers huddle in basements and bunkers, waiting for something to change, knowing nothing will. Model faces an impossible situation. Hitler orders him to hold, to fight to the last man, to tie down American forces that could otherwise advance deeper into Germany. Model knows this is suicide masquerading as strategy, but he is a German officer, sworn to obedience, and the oath still binds even when the orders are insane. He issues commands to maintain defense, to coordinate between trapped units, to preserve order. Privately, he begins releasing men from their oaths. Younger soldiers, those with families, he tells them quietly they may surrender with honor. The war is lost. Dying now serves no purpose. Go home if you can. The surrender happens in pieces, not as one dramatic moment, but as a cascading series of small capitulations. A company commander approaches American lines under white flag, then a battalion, then an entire regiment. Each surrender makes the next easier, removes the stigma, establishes precedent. By mid-April, German soldiers are surrendering in groups of hundreds, sometimes thousands. They emerge from forests and towns, hands raised, exhausted and relieved. American MPs struggle to process the volume. POW cages overflow. The logistics of feeding and housing hundreds of thousands of prisoners becomes an engineering problem in itself. One surrender stands out in the historical record. April 15th, near the town of Wuppertal, an entire German division, roughly 8,000 men, marches into American lines in formation. They carry their weapons, not thrown away in panic, but held properly. Their officers lead them, maintaining discipline to the end. The division commander, a colonel whose name survives only in casualty lists, approaches the American position and requests formal surrender terms. The American officer, a young lieutenant who looks barely old enough to shave, is baffled. He has no authority to accept division-level surrenders. He radios his company commander, who radios battalion, who radios higher. Eventually, a colonel arrives to handle the formalities. The German colonel explains his decision in careful English. His division has fought since Poland in 1939. They fought in France, in Russia, in Italy, now in Germany itself. They have obeyed every order, held every position as long as possible, but they are surrounded, out of ammunition, out of food, and out of hope. He has 8,000 men under his command. Boys, really, most of them. He will not waste their lives for a regime that is already lost. He offers surrender in exchange for fair treatment under Geneva Conventions. The American colonel agrees. The formalities take 20 minutes. The German division stacks weapons, receives food and water, and marches into captivity. Several German soldiers weep openly, not from shame, but from relief that their war is over. Reports of such surrenders reach Berlin through fragmented communication lines. Hitler rages, orders Model to restore order, threatens consequences that everyone knows are empty. Model receives these orders and does not respond. On April 21st, Model walks into a forest near Duisburg and shoots himself. He leaves a note explaining that a field marshal does not surrender. He has released his men from their oaths, given them permission to seek survival, but he himself cannot outlive Germany's defeat. His body is found by advancing American troops 3 days later. The Ruhr pocket formally surrenders on April 18th. Over 325,000 German soldiers enter captivity. It is the largest mass surrender of German forces in the Western theater. The war continues, but not meaningfully. Berlin will fall to the Soviets. American and British forces will meet Russian units at the Elbe. But the outcome is no longer in question. The engineers have already decided it. The numbers, compiled in the months after German surrender, tell a story that words struggle to capture. American engineer units in the European theater from D-Day to VE Day constructed or reconstructed more than 60,000 miles of road. They built or restored over 1,700 bridges with a combined length exceeding 100 miles. They cleared over 2 million mines from roads, bridges, and supply routes. They moved more than 300 million cubic yards of earth, enough to bury Manhattan under 15 feet of dirt. These are not estimates or propaganda figures. They are documented in engineering logs, supply requisitions, and after-action reports filed by units that had no reason to exaggerate. The speed remains the most remarkable aspect. Average construction time for a permanent highway bridge in 1944 was 6 months from planning to completion. American military engineers averaged 18 hours for tactical bridges capable of supporting tank traffic. The longest bridge they built, spanning the Rhine at Wesel, went from first piling to operational status in 31 hours. Engineers worked in shifts, under lights at night, under fire during the day. The Wesel Bridge opened to traffic while German artillery still ranged the approaches. 3 engineers died during construction when a shell landed directly on a work platform. The bridge opened on schedule. German military analysts, those who survived and cooperated with American intelligence, produced detailed studies of Allied logistics in captivity. These documents, classified for years, then gradually released, show a profession trying to understand its own defeat. One study, authored by a former Wehrmacht logistics colonel, runs to 300 pages of dense technical analysis. The conclusion is simple and brutal. Germany lost the war in 1944 when it became clear that Allied engineers could build faster than German forces could destroy. Every other factor, tactics, courage, equipment quality, became irrelevant once the logistical equation tilted irreversibly. The psychological dimension of defeat manifested in unexpected ways. German soldiers, even years after the war, would describe specific moments when they understood the fight was hopeless. Many of these moments involved roads, watching Americans drive across a bridge that was destroyed yesterday, seeing supply trucks roll through terrain that should have been impassable, artillery shells landing with mechanical regularity because American forward observers always had communication, always had roads to bring up ammunition. One former Wehrmacht infantryman interviewed in 1953 described his surrender in terms of infrastructure. He realized Germany had lost when he saw American ambulances on good roads evacuating wounded, while German wounded lay in muddy foxholes waiting for help that never came. Post-war reconstruction of Europe relied heavily on the same techniques developed during combat. Engineer units remained in Germany for years after surrender, rebuilding what the war destroyed. The Marshall Plan, that massive American investment in European recovery, succeeded partly because the engineering expertise and equipment were already in place. Roads were repaired or built new using PSP and rapid concrete methods. Bridges rose from rubble using Bailey Bridge components and American structural steel. German civilians, initially resentful of occupation, gradually recognized that American engineers were rebuilding their country faster than German engineers had managed even in peacetime. The Soviet comparison proved instructive. Red Army logistics relied on different principles, emphasizing durability over speed, accepting that soldiers would suffer hardship so long as minimum supplies reached the front. Soviet engineers built fewer roads but built them to last. Their methods worked in the vast spaces of Eastern Europe where roads were sparse and distances immense. American methods worked in Western Europe's dense infrastructure network where speed mattered more than permanence. Neither approach was objectively superior. Each suited its theater and strategic culture. But the difference shaped post-war perceptions. Germans who experienced both occupations noted the contrast. American zones got rebuilt quickly. Soviet zones got rebuilt slowly but thoroughly. The divergence reflected competing philosophies about engineering, labor, and human value. Recognition of engineer contributions came slowly and incompletely. Combat units received medals, parades, newsreel coverage. Engineers received acknowledgement in official reports that few people read. No engineer received the Medal of Honor during the European campaign, though several died in circumstances that would have merited consideration had they been infantrymen. The bias was understandable if unjust. Heroism is easier to recognize when it involves charging enemy positions than when it involves pouring concrete under fire. The institutional lessons transformed American military doctrine permanently. The War Department, analyzing the European campaign, concluded that engineer capability had been as decisive as air power or armor. Post-war force structure reflected this understanding. Engineer units received increased funding, better equipment, higher priority in the budget battles that always follow victory. The Army established specialized engineering schools, expanded training programs, developed new equipment based on wartime experience. The doctrine of rapid construction became foundational, taught to every officer, drilled into every engineer battalion. Other nations studied American methods with varying degrees of success. Britain, which had its own capable engineer corps, adopted some techniques while maintaining traditional approaches in others. French military engineers, rebuilding from the humiliation of 1940, studied American methods intensively and incorporated them wholesale into post-war doctrine. The Soviet Union, characteristically, claimed to have developed similar techniques independently, though evidence suggests extensive borrowing from captured American equipment and manuals. Within a decade, rapid military construction had become international standard practice, the American innovation absorbed into global military culture. The technology itself evolved rapidly. Pierced steel planking gave way to aluminum matting, lighter and stronger. Quick-setting concrete improved in strength and cure time. Portable bridges became modular systems that could be configured for any span or load requirement. By the Korean War, American engineers could build infrastructure even faster than their predecessors had in Europe. By Vietnam, helicopter portable construction equipment allowed engineers to build in terrain that would have been impossible 20 years earlier. Each generation of technology built on foundations laid in the mud of France and Germany. Veterans of engineer units returned to civilian life with skills that proved immediately valuable. The post-war construction boom needed experienced operators, men who could drive bulldozers, operate cranes, read blueprints, manage construction projects. Former military engineers flooded into highway departments, construction companies, civil engineering firms. They brought military efficiency to civilian work, the habits of speed and improvisation that had been drilled into them under fire. The interstate highway system, authorized in 1956, was built partly by men who had built roads across Europe a decade earlier. The techniques were similar, the urgency less immediate, but the scale even more massive. Some engineers struggled with the transition. War had given their work existential importance, life and death urgency that civilian construction could never match. Building a bridge under artillery fire, knowing that delays cost lives, created a psychological intensity that pouring concrete for a shopping mall parking lot could not replicate. A few became alcoholics, unable to find meaning in peacetime routine. Others channeled their restlessness into ambition, building construction empires, becoming wealthy men who never quite forgot what it felt like to work 72 hours straight while people died if you failed. The German perspective evolved through predictable stages. Immediate post-war years brought denial, attempts to attribute defeat to factors other than American material superiority. Hitler was blamed, or Nazi ideology, or strategic mistakes like invading Russia. Anything except the simpler truth that Germany had been outbuilt and out-engineered. By the 1960s, with a generation of distance, German military historians began acknowledging what their predecessors could not. American logistical superiority had been decisive. The roads mattered as much as the tanks that drove on them. This admission came grudgingly, wrapped in technical analysis that softened the psychological blow. Individual German officers who had surrendered citing American engineering lived with varying degrees of guilt and relief. Some maintained they had made the only rational choice, saving lives that would have been wasted in futile resistance. Others wrestled with whether they had broken faith with comrades still fighting, whether their surrender was wisdom or cowardice. Most simply tried to forget, to build new lives in a new Germany, to avoid dwelling on the moment when they realized their army, their nation, their entire way of life was finished. The American roads were just he symbol, the visible proof of a larger truth. Germany had lost the industrial war before the first shot was fired. Everything after that was just the slow, bloody confirmation of mathematics. The equipment itself, the bulldozers and graders and matting rolls, mostly ended up in surplus yards. Some was sold to foreign militaries under aid programs. Some went to civilian contractors at pennies on the dollar. A surprising amount simply rusted in storage, preserved against some future war that might need it. The machines that built victory became artifacts, then memories, then footnotes in technical manuals. Wars are not won by heroes alone, though heroes fight them. They are won by the unglamorous mathematics of supply and logistics, by the ability to move resources faster than the enemy can respond, by engineering capability that turns geographic obstacles into temporary inconveniences. The German officers who surrendered citing American roads understood something profound that history often forgets. Battle is theater. Logistics is reality. You can win every tactical engagement and still lose the war if your soldiers have no bullets, your tanks have no fuel, your wounded have no evacuation. The roads built across Europe in 1944 and 1945 were temporary structures, most of them. They served their purpose and were abandoned or replaced. Few physical traces remain today, but their impact echoes forward through decades. They proved that industrial capacity, properly organized and deployed, could overcome any defensive strategy. They demonstrated that speed of construction could be weaponized as effectively as speed of maneuver. They showed that engineers, armed with proper equipment and doctrine, could reshape battlefields faster than generals could plan battles. The human cost of this achievement deserves final acknowledgement. Engineers died building these roads. Exact numbers are difficult to establish because engineer casualties were often recorded with combat losses, the categories blurred in the chaos of rapid advance. Conservative estimates suggest over 4,000 American engineers killed in the European theater, with another 15,000 wounded. They died in artillery strikes on construction sites, in accidents with heavy equipment, from exhaustion and exposure, and the thousand small ways that war kills without drama. Their graves rarely receive visitors. Their names appear on monuments in small towns across America, mixed with infantrymen and tankers, no special recognition for the particular nature of their service. Yet their legacy lives in every modern military operation. When American forces deploy anywhere in the world, engineer units go first, building the infrastructure that enables everything that follows. The doctrine perfected in 1945 remains current, updated with new technology but fundamentally unchanged in philosophy. Build fast, build good enough, keep moving. The roads those engineers built across Germany lasted only months before peacetime reconstruction replaced them with permanent highways. But the methods they pioneered, the proof that engineering could decide wars, that capability endures. It endures in doctrine, in training, in the institutional memory of armies that learned the lesson German officers articulated in the spring of 1945. You cannot fight what you cannot stop, and you cannot stop an enemy who builds faster than you can destroy.